Well, if you think that I'm going to stand over a hot stove and cook for every knick-knack you bring in here, you're crazy.
But Toots, Stan is different.
I'll say he's different.
Hello and welcome to the 10th instalment of the Laurel and Hardy blogcast. I'm Patrick Vasey, the author of the Laurel and Hardy blog, and on today's show we're continuing our interview with Laurel and Hardy historian, author and expert Randy Skretvedt, as we discuss today's films in focus. On the last show, episode 9, Randy told us his Laurel and Hardy backstory, and we also looked at the boys' first film as an official team, The Second 100 Years. And so, for the next step along on our Laurel and Hardy journey, Randy and I will be discussing the boys' cameo appearance in Max Davidson's Call of the Cuckoo, and also the hugely significant and equally frustrating Hats Off. As usual, we will of course be putting our guest under the interrogation spotlight as we ask Randy to choose his desert island flicks with the Atoll question. So, thank you for joining me once again, and if you're ready, we'll turn the crank and get this episode started.
That sounds swell to me.
I think it's good, too.
Yes, sir.
How about you, Finn?
Why, it's a knockout.
And today's first film in focus is Call of the Cuckoo. Filmed June 13th to June 22nd, 1927. It was released on October 15th, 1927, produced by Hal Roach, directed by Clyde A. Bruckman, photographed by Floyd Jackman, titles by H.M. Walker. Main cast: Max Davidson, Lillian Elliott, Spec O'Donnell, Stan Laurel, Oliver Hardy, Charlie Chase, James Finlayson, and Charlie Hall. The development of Stan and Babe into the team of Laurel and Hardy can sometimes seem to have been a stuttering and somewhat long drawn-out process. Tracking their developmental arc at the Roach Studios from 45 Minutes from Hollywood to their first picture as an official team, The Second 100 Years, it can feel like it took forever for their magic, their chemistry together to be noticed, harnessed, and released to the world. In actual fact, it only took approximately 10 months. From a standing start to an almost perfect comedy double act in less than a year, it's pretty impressive. There was, of course, still some fine-tuning that would be done in the months and even years that followed. But by October 1927, audiences were finally able to begin their love affairs with Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy. It's amazing to think that all these years later, those relationships have endured, grown stronger, and further that new relationships begin and continue to blossom as younger generations discover the magic and feel the love. The success and popularity of the Laurel and Hardy team is phenomenal and has, of course, been well documented. But while the boys were struggling to find their own unique characters that would ultimately bring them immortality and lift them out of the ranks of the Hal Roach All-Star series, there were a number of other comedians in the Roach stable that were enjoying their own time in the limelight as the leading stars of the studio. Following the amicable departure of Roach's original superstar, Harold Lloyd, who left in 1923 to set up his own independent production company, Roach had to fill the massive creative void left by Lloyd and find their new comedic figureheads for his studio. He tried out many artists, signing players for their own series of pictures, such as Toto the Clown, James Finlayson, Glenn Tryon, and even Stan Laurel himself, with varying levels of success. By 1927, there were 3 main series in production. Our Gang and Charlie Chase are very well known, but the third is arguably less so, especially today. That series was headed by a certain German-born Jewish comedian named Max Davidson. Davidson's brand of comedy played on racial stereotypes, and back in 1927 the series was given the label dialect comedies. During the 1920s, Jewish humour was very common and very popular, and Max Davidson, as Hal Roach Studios historian Richard W. Band tells us in an essay covering Davidson's career, was the skilled exponent of this particular niche. Of course, for Davidson's legacy, this racial stereotyping that was at the heart of his act has made any modern-day revival of his work almost impossible. Author Glenn Mitchell points out that this is a shame, as Davidson's comedies had a sympathetic approach, with gangs that were not exclusively ethnic and are of a high standard. Further, as cited in Band's essay, film curator Paolo Cerci Usai said of Davidson's work that his films parody ethnic particularities without even a tinge of racism is what bestows Davidson with greatness. As is the case with all truly intelligent film comedies, the parody also mocks cultural and ethnic prejudices. Today, silent film historians such as Steve Masser, as on the Laurel Hardy broadcast, episode 8, credit one of Max Davidson's pictures, Past the Gravy, from 1928, as being one of the best examples of silent short comedies in existence. And although there is an apparent reluctance to revive his work, it should be noted that, as Glenn Mitchell points out, a lengthy Davidson programme drew considerable acclaim as the closing gala of the 1997 London Jewish Film Festival, proving his comedies can still be appreciated by modern audiences. In 1927, Davidson's appeal and box office draw was becoming considerable, earning him the kudos of having one of the leading series exported from the Hal Roach studios at that time. Quote, "As a special comedy attraction, The Victory offers another of those side-splitting Hal Roach comedies featuring Max Davidson, The Call of the Cuckoo. Davidson is rapidly coming to the front as one of filmdom's foremost comedians, and his recent comedies, which have been shown in Salt Lake, have proven more than successful." That was the Salt Lake Tribune from February 12, 1928. The Roach team were very keen to push their new comedy team, Laurel and Hardy, in front of the audiences as much as possible, and as such they crowbarred them into Davidson's latest picture, Call of the Cuckoo, which was being filmed concurrently with the second 100 Years. Stan and Babe shot their scenes just days after filming Wrapped on their prison picture, which is the reason they can still be seen sporting their shaven heads. In an interview with Randy Skretvedt, regular Roach cameraman George Stevens commented that the boys were just too good to be kept inactive, so they were put almost right away into the next picture, brush cut and all. In Call of the Cuckoo, along with fellow All-Stars James Finlayson, Charlie Chase, and supporting regular Charlie Hall, the boys appear as patients from an asylum located right next door to Max Davidson's house. The boys' scenes, although brief, are enough for their effortless quality to shine and lift what is a fairly mediocre film. We first see them in fancy dress, with Stan dressed as a fireman, complete with running hosepipe, Babe sporting a snazzy top hat, and Finlayson in a bowler hat and trench coat, standing in front of a pretend microphone. They're quickly joined by Chase, tugged up in full sailor's uniform, and who begins to belt out an unusual song into the microphone. The title card then reads, "Training School for Radio Announcers. The quicker they go daffy, the sooner they get a diploma." It's pretty obvious that these boys are daffy to start with. The noisy funmakers are spotted from Davidson's window by Davidson himself, and then crucially by his prospective buyers, including Frank Brownlee, who was also fresh from the set of the second 100 Years, where he'd been playing the role of the prison warden. The boys lark and frolic around on the lawn in fancy dress with complete childish abandon. At one point, Stan and Babe recreate the famous William Tell scene, but instead of shooting his arrow into the apple, sitting on top of Babe's head, Stan hits a much larger target, Babe's backside. These comic sequences feel so natural that one could easily imagine them being ad-libbed, on the spot, or even filmed in secret without the actors realising. Unfortunately, these scenes are so enjoyable that one doesn't want to return to the leading players of the main action. Davidson and the boys are never seen in the same shot, with Max remaining in his house and the patients in their garden. They were very likely filmed separately and then edited together afterward, and as such, they can begin to feel a little disconnected. However, a connection is forged quite cleverly, as Stan unwittingly allows his hosepipe to aim towards Davidson's open windows, and Max gets a couple of soakings. This is the final straw for the Gimpelwort family, and they decide to sell up at the first opportunity. So keen are they to move that they impulsively agree to exchange their house with a complete stranger without even going to view his property first. The family, including Mama, played by Lillian Elliott, and their gormless son, Love's Greatest Mistake, played by Speck O'Donnell, arrive at their fancy-looking new home full of optimism. Nearby, two neighbours looking on comment, "Look, some mug has bought that jerry-built house at last. It took them 2 days to build that house and 2 years to get rid of it." Unfortunately for the Gimpelworts, looks are indeed deceiving, as the fancy home is more akin to a fairground house of fun. The doors fall off their hinges when pulled on, the electrics are all screwed up, the bathroom light switch activates the shower, and even the pattern on the kitchen floor washes off when mopped. In short, it's a disaster zone. More amusing scenes follow as the family housewarming party, including an appearance by another Laurel and Hardy regular, Leo Willis, turns into one big punch-up. As the picture begins to wrap up with his extended family fighting, the near destruction of his new home, and the total destruction of his car, Max asks a question that nobody in a silent comedy should ever ask. Is there anything else that can happen? Well, Max, you bet your life there is. No sooner have the words left his mouth, or rather the title card disappears, than Davidson is soaked in water from an open window again. Looking outside, Messrs. Laurel, Hardy, Finlayson and Chase are all shouting and waving from the neighbouring garden fence. Cheerio, we've moved next door. Following its release, Call of the Cuckoo received very mixed reviews from the trade papers and also theatre owners and operators. From the Idaho Evening Times, March 5th, 1928, the ludicrous things that happen puts this comedy in a class by itself. It is justly a fit addition to the Davidson-Hal Roach series of comedies which have taken so firm a hold on the affections of the public. Davidson is supported by an extraordinary cast under the direction of Clyde A. Bruckman. Leo McCary supervised the job, and H.M. Walker added to the fun by contributing his usual witty titles. From the Salt Lake Telegram, March 18th, 1928, the Victory has been most fortunate in obtaining The Call of the Cuckoo, which during its recent premiere on the coast was acclaimed one of the outstanding comedies of the year. From the Exhibitors Herald and Moving Picture World, May 5th, 1928, very good, though I have seen better from Davidson, said the Central Theatre manager in Selkirk, Manitoba, Canada. From the Exhibitors Herald and Moving Picture World again, hardly as good as I expected from Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, from the Crystal Theatre manager in Watseka, Illinois. The Call of the Cuckoo with Max Davidson in the leading role is one of the best comedies we have seen this season, from the Harrisburg Telegraph, June 5th, 1928. Hardly a laugh in the whole 2 reels. Don't see why they get this bunk for a comedy. Joyland Theatre, Corning, Arkansas. Good for words, too silly for better houses. That was the Community Theatre, Ridgeway, in Exhibitors Herald World, January 19th, 1929. For Laurel Hardy fans, Call of the Cuckoo is a great opportunity to watch Messrs. Laurel, Hardy, Chase, Finlayson and Hall all fooling around on screen together, albeit briefly. It appears the motivation behind the boys' inclusion in the film was only to capitalise on another opportunity to promote their newly launched comedy team. Although this would not be the boys' last cameo appearance, the success of the Laurel and Hardy team grew so rapidly from this point that there was never the need to use such appearances as promotional publicity stunts ever again. And now we'll pick up our conversation with Randy right where we left it last time as we discuss Call of the Cuckoo.
Yeah, let's move on to Call of the Cuckoo singular.
Yes, Call of the Cuckoo singular.
I mentioned the 100 thing about the second 100 years, and yes, it is Call of the Cuckoo singular. And just since I'm talking about this, hats off evidently has an exclamation mark after off. So strange little anomalies for people who want to get every T crossed and I dotted.
Oh, and of course we should mention, because this links the 2 films, the Stan and Babe's hair. Yes. Well, how could we overlook that part? Yeah, well, as George Stevens said, who shot both of these before he became a great director many years later, he said, well, they were so tremendous in the Convict picture, and this, of course, is even before it had been released, but obviously somebody at the studio knew they had a winner. And he said, that the studio wanted to rush them into another picture just to get them into another film and get them before the public again. So, we didn't want to wait for their hair to grow in. So there they are with the shaved heads. Right after the production of, and they were, Call of the Cuckoo, the other footage with Max Davidson was shot pretty much at the same time the second 100 years was being shot. So, it was after Laurel and Hardy probably had finished that they went right into Call of the Cuckoo. Unfortunately, USC does not have the 1927 payroll ledgers and never did. And Ned Comstock was always so apologetic to me about that. God bless him. He said, I'm so sorry we don't have 1927 because I know that's such a key year for you, but we never got that one. It's not like it was stolen. And you would never be able to steal one of those payroll ledgers. They're huge and heavy. They're this big. But they've got them for, going way back to the beginning, 1914, the beginning of the studio. Anyway, my Call of the Cuckoo, right after those 2 pictures with the shaved heads were made,
the studio went on its annual 1-month vacation where the whole studio would go on vacation rather than a little few people at a time. So July of 1927, Stan went to England for the first time in 15 years. He had not seen AJ. I don't know if he had seen Venetia. I think he knew Venetia before that. But anyway, he hadn't seen his brothers or his sister. And so here he goes. And that must have been quite a shock. Now I'm doing well in the movies, but, having the shaved head. So that's where he went on his vacation. Babe and Myrtle went to Havana because Cuba was sort of the playground back in those days. Right. And so I have their passport picture. So here it is.
Such a great picture.
That's what they looked like on their way to Havana, Cuba, for their vacation in July of 1927. That was in Babe's own papers. So that's the only surviving copy of that. But I did put it in the book to make sure that the image will carry on. So
it's a great image. It's a really good photograph.
They don't, either one of them look particularly happy. So,
well, you never do on passport photos, do you? They're never the best photograph, but they look really funny. That's great. So,
but you Call of the Cuckoo it's what Hal Roach called Max Davidson dialect comedies. Now, of course, I assume dialect with spoken humor, but I guess that's a good way of putting. I suppose now he'd say ethnic humor, but they called the Max Davidson dialect comedies because Max Davidson is sort of an old world European Jewish character with the stereotypical derby hat and long coat and the beard and the mannerisms and all of that, which I hope people don't find offensive. It's meant with affection. You suffer along with Max. You don't make fun of him. He always has Speck O'Donnell. He always has an Irish kid as his son. I don't know why. Walter Speck O'Donnell, who looks exactly the same in movies in the 1950s as he does as a teenager in movies in the late 1920s. He did not change a lot. He changed a little bit by the early 60s. He's in some Andy Griffith Show episodes, but anyway, he's the nitwit teenage son. He's got a daughter, sometimes played by Martha Sleeper, who's a 20s flapper. And some of the gags in Call of the Cuckoo are similar to what we find later on in Saps at Sea, with the mechanics of the things are all, I don't know if they actually do the gag with the gas and the water being intermixed, but which they do in Saps at Sea. But it's a similar type of gag. The one I really like is the pattern of the floor tile.
Yes.
When Mrs. Davidson, or Mrs. Gimplewart, I think is her name, she's mopping the floor, and as she does so, the paint of the tile is removed. And I thought, think of the art director and think of the people who had to paint that, to make that gag work. I'm always amazed by the art direction and the costume and the prop people at Roach's, because they did not have a lot of money, but boy, it's very impressive sets and costume design. And again, if it was going to get a laugh, they'd find a way to do it. As Roy Seawright said, he said, when the Roach studio would take its annual 1-month vacation, I couldn't afford to do that, so I would go work at MGM while Roach was closed up. And he said, at MGM, they bought their special effects. At Roach's, we had to make them with spit and baling wire.
Brilliant. Mind you, can't, if you think about something like Sailors Beware, the sets in Sailors Beware, there's a really grand staircase, and it's just phenomenal what they
Or Sugar Daddies. Sugar Daddies, the interior of the hotel.
Yes.
Look at this.
Yeah.
I mean, even the shorts that Keaton and Chaplin and Lloyd made don't have sets like that. And you find those even in the Pathé pictures. So it wasn't just an infusion of MGM money, which there was. And that was a major benefit of being affiliated with MGM, because even though in 1927 MGM had only been around for 3 years, it had very quickly become the major player in the motion picture business, and they had lots of cash, and so they would supply a lot of the funding for the Hal Roach pictures, and that shows up on screen.
Yeah, they just floor me sometimes. Just say, but yeah, Max Davidson. I'm never really taken to Max Davidson. I mean,
there's a really great one called Pass the Gravy.
Yes, yeah.
Which is on the National Registry of Historic Film. There is a good DVD put out, rather ironically, by an archive in Germany, celebrating the work of a Jewish comedian. So let's hope fences are mended by now, by this late date. Oh my goodness!
There's certain irony there.
Yeah, but thank God they've done a very nice job of preserving what exists. Max Davidson, a lot of the late silents that Roach made do not survive. A lot of the Charlie Chases do not survive, or are not known to exist. When I talked with Richard Currier, he said, as soon as Laurel and Hardy were starting to take off, I told Charlie Levin at the lab to make 2 fine-grained master positives on every Laurel and Hardy instead of the usual 1. Because I knew if there was anything that was going to get printed and printed and printed from this studio, it was going to be the Laurel and Hardy pictures.
Right.
He told me that. And I said, well, posterity thanks you for your foresight, because that's why we have all those Laurel and Hardys from the silence from 28 and 29 in good repair.
Yeah.
Or we did have at one point until Michael, well, never mind. Anyway, I mean, that's why we at least have reference copies on everything, because Richard Currier had the foresight to have Charlie Levin at the Roach. They had their own lab at Roach's. They made their own dailies, they did their own printing. So Charlie Levin, by the way, is also the guy who ran the lab for Chaplin's Mutual comedies. So can you imagine one man was responsible for taking that negative and making sure it didn't get ruined in the lab for the 12 great Chaplin mutuals and all the Laurel and Hardy pictures? Yikes. Because you do hear things about, it got ruined in the lab. Well, I don't think it ever happened with Laurel and Hardy. So anyway, Second 100 Years is fine, and Max Davidson's work is fine, is what exists of it. The other weird thing about Call of the Cuckoo is, and I thought this was because Stan was still in England on his vacation, but no, he had just come back when they started production on this. There's a Max Davidson short called, is it Love 'Em and Feed 'Em? I think that's it.
Yes.
And it's Max Davidson and Hardy. Yeah. And Hardy's hair still hasn't grown in yet. And they're like a couple of prospectors who crash society after they strike it rich with a gold mine. Right. It exists in fragmentary form, but it's been sort of pieced together on this German DVD. So what survives of it is there. But, it's strange. You would think, well, if they were building up Laurel and Hardy as a team, why would they do this one with Hardy and Davidson? Well, you have to make films with what elements you have at your disposal. So
yeah, but it does smack though that they still did view them as part of the All Stars, even though they were building this team around them. Yeah, definitely.
And that film might have been in preparation before Second 100 Years happened. So I don't know.
Yeah. That's true. That's a good point.
And that's something I did not know about when I did the book the first time. So that, and also the fact that Laurel and Hardy actually were in A Pair of Tights with Anita Garvin and Marion Byron.
Right.
They actually were in it, and you can see the call sheets where they were supposed to show up on the back lot, and there's a script which details what they did, which essentially derailed the whole plot of the movie. So it's a good thing that they decided to eliminate Laurel and Hardy and redo the ending as it is now, because it's a much better movie.
Right. Right. And I was just going to say about Call of the Cuckoos, those, I mean, I know Laurel and Hardy and Charlie Chase and Finlayson, they're not in it much, but what wonderful little scenes they are.
Oh yeah, they seem like home movies. They seem kind of improvised, especially the wheelbarrow bit. And then the microphone that is a mouse trap. With I don't know what that cheese tasted like that Charlie eats, but but yeah, it's fun and it's impromptu, and it's just kind of nice to see something like that.
We'll rejoin Randy in just a few moments, but first it's time for the audio blog of today's second film in focus, Hats Off. It was filmed August 19th to August 29th, 1927, and it was released on November the 5th, 1927. Produced by Hal Roach, directed by Hal Yates, supervised by Leo McCary, photographed by George Stevens, and titles by H.M. Walker. Main cast, Stan Laurel, Oliver Hardy, with appearances by James Finlayson, Anita Garvin, and Dorothy Coburn. Last seen during its re-release back in the 1930s, Hats Off now has the distinction of being the only Laurel and Hardy film still missing in its entirety from their canon. Film scholars and collectors have been searching for decades, but all traces of the film seem to have completely disappeared from the face of the earth. Forget the search for the lost city of Atlantis, the quest for the Holy Grail, or even the attempts to find the missing link in human evolution. The world needs to get its priorities straight. As more and more time passes, the hopes of ever finding a copy of Hats Off gets smaller and smaller. Not surprisingly then, Hats Off holds a special interest for fans of The Boys as we pore over snippets of information about its possible whereabouts and attempt to visualise its plot and similarities to later works. This is such a frustrating film to be missing as it sits at a crucial time in the team's chronology. The previous film, not including their brief cameo in Max Davidson's Call of the Cuckoo, The Second 100 Years, officially labelled by the Hal Roach Studios as the first film with the boys as a team, is the first picture where the boys' long-standing relationship with each other starts to take shape. We can see from the available stills from Hats Off that these key features are in place for the first time since Duck Soup and Do Detectives Think were close, but not quite there. To all intents and purposes, therefore, Hats Off looks like a proper Laurel and Hardy comedy. We can only speculate on whether the boys' relationship built upon the excellent start in the previous outing, but the likelihood is that it probably did. What's interesting is that the next film, Putting Pants on Philip, despite being a fantastic comedy, failed to build on the great work of the previous two, casting the boys as an uncle with his Scottish nephew. Unquestionably great fun, but absolutely not Stan and Ollie. Because we're still unable to screen it, a question mark then must hang over Hats Off as to whether it can be considered the first picture to look and feel like Laurel and Hardy. However, what we can say is that if The Second 100 Years is the film that officially announced the pairing of Stan and Babe, it was Hats Off that historically cemented them as a team. The film was so well received and the reviews were so positive that Hal Roach and supervising director Leo McCary knew that these two boys working together as a team were capable of creating comedy gold, the likes of which nobody had seen before. A statement made and published in the official studio press sheet released to promote the picture confirms this beyond doubt. Quote, Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy will henceforth and forever, according to present plans at least, be co-starred by the famous young producer. It was because of their splendid work in Hats Off, wherein the fact of their fitness for co-stars is well demonstrated, that Roach shook each solemnly by the hand and told them they'd better get along well personally from now on, because they were to work together forever. Mr. Roach's crystal ball was clearly working incredibly well, as work together forever they certainly did. Despite being lost, we actually know a considerable amount about the film and its content. There is a good deal of stills in existence, and from these we can tell that the story is in effect an early version of Stan and Ollie's 1932 Academy Award-winning short, The Music Box. Once again, the official press sheet provides an illustrative synopsis of the action. Stan and Oliver are out of work and calling on prospective bosses. At last, they come in contact with a washing machine sales manager who offers them job soliciting. They accept and are loaded down with a sparkling new and extremely heavy machine as a demonstrator. Many hectic adventures overtake them in their efforts to educate the ladies of the town to the uses of their machine, but they are apparently unable, through no fault of their own, to make sale. Finally, a lady on top of a mountain beckons to them, and laboriously, between them, they manage to carry the machine up the 9 flights of steps, only to learn that she wishes them to mail a letter for her. Heartbroken, they convey the tottering bulk of the machine again to the bottom. She calls them again. They believe she has changed her mind and will purchase one of the machines. After much travel and grief, they manage to get the machine again to the top, only to learn that the lady forgot to stamp the letter. A few more experiences like this and they're ready to quit. An argument ensues over their hats. Each knocks the other's hats off. Passers-by innocently become embroiled, losing their own hats. The thing becomes a riot with the whole town knocking off hats. Meanwhile, a tractor runs over the sample washing machine, and it's the end of a perfect day for our salesman. The main supporting characters mentioned in the synopsis were played by two of the boys' most reliable regulars, giving Hats Off a very familiar feel. The role of the salesman, who employs Stan and Ollie to transport the machine, was played by the ever-dependable James Finlayson, and Anita Garvin was cast in the role of the frustrating lady on top of a mountain. For Finlayson, who'd been such an important co-star both for Stan during his solo years and also with Stan and Babe at Roach, resulting in them being widely known as a comedy trio, this would be his last appearance with the boys until the latter half of 1928. It was becoming apparent that the Laurel and Hardy team were being designed as an exclusive duo, and as such, Finlayson's roles were becoming smaller and less central to the action. Understandably, James left the Roach Studios to seek more prominent roles in feature pictures elsewhere. However, when this move proved to be less successful than he'd hoped, he returned to the Roach fold and contented himself with the supporting roles that would become so memorable and so loved for. As with a number of the boys' silent films that were later remade as talkies, the goings-on in Hats Off appears to mirror the music box very closely indeed, or vice versa. The plot and accompanying stills shows multiple trips up and down the steps carrying their respective heavy loads, and one image even shows Stan at street level kicking a lady, Dorothy Coburn, in the middle of her daily duties. What we can tell from the official synopsis is that one of the main differences seems to be Hats Off's finale, and this is evidently the scene that gives the film its name. The boys have some sort of trademark hat mix-up that ends with them kicking each other's hats down the street. In true early Laurel and Hardy style, this leads to a scene of mass carnage in which scores of bypassing strangers get drawn in, one by one, knocking off each other's hats and stamping on them, etc., etc. This then has to be the first example of the finale scenes that would become a Laurel and Hardy trademark in these early days of the team. This would act as the blueprint for the finales of many of the boys' classic silent shorts, including Battle of the Century, You're Darn Tootin', Tootars, Should Married Men Go Home, to name but a few. More evidence, if any, were needed as to how important this film is to the history of Laurel and Hardy. Another element that has been debated over the years and that still remains unclear is the origin of the idea. Who came up with the overall premise of two guys carrying a heavy load up a long flight of steps? The Hal Roach Studios claimed that the inspiration for Hats Off and the music box came from Stan Laurel, who just spotted the steps one day whilst driving around the outskirts of Los Angeles. It is said that Stan's creative mind immediately formed the nucleus of a comedic situation and the rest was history. Or was it? There are other variations on this version of events. One claims that it wasn't actually Stan who spotted the steps, it was a Roach gag man, and then another states that it was Stan with Billy Gilbert driving around LA, as Billy himself related in a charming interview for Pratfall magazine, Volume 1, Number 3. Quote, "Being very creative and inventive, Billy enjoyed working with Stan and Babe. They always referred to their characters as the fellows. In developing scenes, they would ask, 'What would the fellows do in a situation like this?' and proceed from there. One day, Stan and Billy were driving along Silver Lake Boulevard when Billy noticed a long flight of steps leading to a house high on a hilltop. They were struck with the absurdity of such an arrangement and began discussing the various problems it would entail. Then they thought of the fellows. What could they have them deliver to the house? It must be something huge and cumbersome, but also delicate. What else but a piano? The music box was born, and the rest is classic film history." Now this is a nice story, but it's hard to believe that the location and premise for the music box was devised with no consideration for Hats Off, an almost identical film shot 5 years previous and at the exact same location. Laurel and Hardy historian and author A.J. Marriott makes another convincing case, featured in the March 2005 edition of the Laurel and Hardy magazine. This version of events harks back to the days of Stan's youth when he lived in North Shields in the UK. Mr. Marriott explains that lying between Stan's old house in Dockeray Square and Fish Quay, an area where Stan was known to have played as a boy, were 3 sets of steep steps, and one in particular, named the Ropery Steps, was and in fact still is identical to the music box steps. There's a local story that holds that a delivery man appeared one day and was trying to find a house that was on top of the hill. A group of children pointed out where the house was, and the man proceeded to carry his heavy load of goods up the steps. Sounding familiar? If this local myth is true, then it's very feasible that it could have been recalled by Stan 27 odd years later to the Hal Roach gagmen, and the story quickly took shape from there. One further possible source of inspiration, and arguably a more acceptable one, was forwarded by Laurel and Hardy collector and longtime fan Dave Tomlinson, who, writing in the July 2005 edition of the Laurel and Hardy magazine, highlighted a scene at the end of a 1926 Max Sennett short, Ice Cold Cocos. This was released 12 months before Hats Off, and in it, Billy Bevan and Andy Clyde attempt to deliver a large block of ice up the same steps using the same camera angles as Hats Off and the music box. Further, Mr. Tomlinson also built on this theory by mentioning an essay by Laurel and Hardy expert Richard W. Bann, in which it states that Stan was good friends with Ice Cold Coco's co-author, Clarence Hennick. So there could be a strong argument that this is where it all started. Credit for the picture overall appears to have been handed to supervising director Leo McCary, as this article in Los Angeles Times from March 11, 1928 demonstrates. Leo McCary, supervising director and a vice president of the Hal Roach Studios, scores again with Hats Off, co-starring the comedy team Laurel and Hardy. McCary is the author of the story material which goes into the filming of the Laurel and Hardy series, which have become so very popular. The young supervising director is recognised as one of the best comedy constructionists, and to him, in great part, is due the success of this comedy team. Hats Off portrays Laurel and Hardy as an energetic but dumb pair of washing machine salesmen who tote their samples by hand. The picture is one of their funniest, and when that statement is made to audiences who saw the Battle of the Century, it necessarily takes a lot of territory. Wherever the inspiration came from, and no matter who was ultimately responsible, Hats Off received incredibly positive reviews when it was released, and further strengthened the boys' growing reputation, and, as already discussed, cemented their partnership for the rest of their lives. The following roundup of reviews, published in Motion Picture News, March 23, 1928, taken from various newspapers in the Los Angeles area, gives a good flavour of the reaction. Evening Herald. The funniest as well as most deeply touching motion pictures make us cry, a paradox which finds its way into our everyday language, as I laughed so hard I cried. I can describe in no other way my reaction to Hats Off. This glorious slapstick occupies a subordinate position on the bill, but it saves the day as far as entertainment is concerned. It is no exaggeration to say that the entire audience bordered on hysteria at the climax of this two-reeler. In my opinion, Roach has the most promising comedy team on the funny staff, Laurel and Hardy. The Los Angeles Record said, "A comedy gem. Laurel and Hardy in their new edition of Roach comedies are stealing the shows quite frequently when matched against feature pictures." The LA Times, "It is fairly obvious that the two-reelers in which Roach is so felicitously presenting Laurel and Hardy are carefully mapped out from fade in to fade out before ever the camera crank is turned, and the result is uproariously funny. Hats Off, as the latest of the series is entitled, takes the lead as the real laugh hit of the show." The LA Times again, "A picture of wonderful beauty. Never has the camera been used quite so effectively and artistically as in this subject. It is indeed a picture which, possibly more than any other, reveals the strides made in motion picture camera work. The story is admirably worked out with splendid suspense." Of course, the praise wasn't received only from Los Angeles theatre owners. "They roared themselves sick. Wonderful climax," was said from the Capitol Theatre in Duncan, British Columbia. "Very good comedy. These birds are great. Always figured they would be a great team since seeing them in second 100 years," was the Old Trail Theatre, Hebron, Ohio. "Gentlemen, here's a knockout. Probably the funniest comedy we've shown for a long, long time." And that was the Opera House in Louisville, Nebraska. In addition to the overwhelming reception gifted to this film, the positivity was mirrored within the executive team at the Hal Roach Studios. A History of the Hal Roach Studios by Richard Lewis Ward and 100 Years of Brodies with Hal Roach by Craig Kalman both excellently document the growing awareness within the studio of Laurel and Hardy's magic. Both publications reproduce numerous telegrams sent between Roach staff members discussing their new assets. Richard Lewis Ward writes, "After a screening committee showing of Hats Off, Fred Quimby wrote Roach, 'I think that this subject is a riot. I think that Hardy and Laurel make a great comedy team and hope that you keep them working together. Craig Kalman notes a response from Roach to Fred Quimby just a few weeks later. Our product is rapidly improving. Laurel and Hardy will be box office attractions for the coming season. Any Laurel Hardy comedy is a first-run piece of merchandising. I want to see the day come when we are giving the MGM features a run for their money so far as popularity of the two types of amusement is concerned. And with the continued improvement of the quality of our pictures, I feel this is not far off. Yet again, Mr. Roach's crystal ball was in good form. Laurel and Hardy were on a trajectory that would very quickly see their short subjects going toe-to-toe with the main feature attractions in theatres. And not only that, they would hold their own. The confident tone of Roach's response to Fred Quimby is very clear. He knew they had something very special on their hands. His tail was up, and it was time to start strutting. Laurel and Hardy were hitting the big time. And although the vast majority of fans today have never had the pleasure of seeing it, Hats Off is undoubtedly one of the most important films Laurel and Hardy ever made.
Ladies and gentlemen.
With your hat off.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Ladies and gentlemen, with your hat off.
Oh, you don't say that.
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, without your hat off.
Go ahead.
And I think we will move on if we can.
Yes.
We're going to talk... Now, this is a very interesting one. Hats off.
Hats off. Well, you know, when I saw it the other day, I was thinking, oh, no.
Stop right there.
No,
right there.
No, we don't have Hats Off. Among Babe's papers, Hats Off and The Battle of the Century were the two pictures. Ironic that they've been missing in action for so many years. They were absolutely the two pictures that the Roach Studio used to really publicize this new team of Laurel and Hardy.
Mm-hmm.
Battle of the Century, but even more so Hats Off, which makes it doubly sad and ironic that we don't have a print of it. And Babe was very proud of this because, you know, he had not been a featured play. He'd been a supporting player for most of his time in movies. He'd been part of the Plump and Runt team at Vim back in 1916, but ever since then, he'd been a supporting comic, really. And so now, as Venice Lloyd told me, she said, he came over to the house one day and he was pacing up and down and he said, do you really think I can be part of a team with Laurel? Do you really think so? He was very anxious to be, you know, because he knew he was being groomed for this, you know.
Right, okay.
And so in his papers, there's this. They had Hilarity Week at the Metropolitan Theater in Los Angeles. And this is a little flyer. There's a photo of Laurel and Hardy and Hats Off. Yeah. And it was on the bill with Tilly's Punctured Romance, not the Chaplin film, but the Paramount film from 1928 with W.C. Fields and Chester Conklin. Right. And there are also several newspaper clippings of reviews from that showing in Babe's papers. All of them love Hats Off. It's the funniest thing they've ever seen. And all of them say that Tilly's Punctured Romance is the worst thing ever filmed. What is this? Not a laugh in a carload. So there's that. Then on onion skin paper, once again, this is 93 years old. Campaign on Laurel and Hardy. This is an outline from the studio of all the different, I should have reprinted this in the book. You see, for all the stuff that's in the book, there's more, which is why I need an archivist to please help me so that I don't, I just turned 62. I need to get all this preserved before I shuffle off this mortal coil. Anyway, this is advanced trailers, specially prepared advertising trailers used in advance. Additional newspaper advertising space. 100 special 24-sheet billboard posters. House organ of Metropolitan Theater gave the comedy special billing, which is what I just showed you. Hollywood Dry, which was a ginger ale company. 50 Owl drugstore windows in Los Angeles have displays of Hollywood Dry ginger ale tied in with enlargements of the two comedians drinking the ale. What else? Anyway, motor transit. 80 motor transit stages carried half-sheet cards, those are posters, tying in with the comedy and theater. Ralph's Grocery Stores, which we still have. Entire chain of 50 Ralph's Grocery Stores inserted slips into bags with copy, Hats Off to Ralph's Vacuum Coffee, then see Hats Off at the Metropolitan. Radio hookup, elevator cards, oh goodness, I mean, just this huge advertising campaign. And then Babe also had, I hope people will be able to see this. There's a little picture here in the middle. It's a grocery store, and it has a little card for hats off there. This is the special standee, which you would have seen at the movie theater.
Yeah.
This is an ad. Hats off to Motor Transit. Say Laurel Hardy. Hats off at the Metropolitan in Los Angeles.
Wow. Yeah.
There is how many two-reel comedies got billboards?
Wow, look at that. Look at that. For such an early comedy of theirs as well.
Yes,
that's amazing, isn't it?
Yes. And then here are cars which are driving. These are Hal Roach studio buses.
Ah, yes.
These are
what book, isn't it?
These would take the Our Gang kids to locations.
Oh, right.
J.W. Burns was the transportation guy at Roach's.
Right.
And they have posters for hats off all over them there. Then they had a tie-in with the Stetson Hat Company, noted for Western cowboy hats, but they also made other kinds of hats. So there's Stan and his Stetson for hats off. And here is Babe with his, looking very dapper. And again, Babe, these are all from Babe's collection. So he was particularly, if he had asked for prints of these from Stax, he was he was really happy that, that this publicity was happening. Here once again, Roach Transportation people.
What a great shot!
And then here's the ivy-covered wall. You always see that in the background, and more shots. Here we are once again at the Metropolitan Theater. One side of the lobby. Back when they had showmanship at movie theaters, back when we had movie theaters, they would do things like this in the lobby. And what was the Chili's Punctured Romance? Oh, and coming next Thursday, another comedy team. We had. In fact, somebody wrote an article about this. I've got a clipping of it. It's Chester Conklin and W.C. Fields in the remake of Chili's Punctured Romance. Laurel Hardy and Hats Off, and coming soon, the comedy team of Wallace Beery and Raymond Hatton in Partners in Crime. So we have three movie comedy teams right in a row here.
Wow.
And then another Hats Off, please. See Laurel Hardy at the Metropolitan Theater. All of this. And I do have one original from the film. Oh, and then of course, God bless her, Anita Garvin was in the film.
Oh, yeah.
And that house this is the house that should have been there for the music box, because this actually is the top of the steps of the music box. When they do it in the music box, then we're back at the studio.
Yes,
for Professor von Schwarzenhoffen's house. But Anita Garvin's house was the house, and it's there still, and looks like it. So yeah, Hats Off was very definitely the kickoff film for the Laurel and Hardy series, even if it wasn't an actual series just yet in terms of studio documentation, but definitely the one for the public. And so Hal Yates and Maury Gratian are the two guys in the payroll ledgers who are credited as the writers for Laurel and Hardy all during the silent period. They never get credit. It always says H.M. Walker, who really did titles and sort of he also, along with Leo McCarey, sort of oversaw all the product. But anyway, Hal Yates later became a comedy director, and he, in 1945, directed a film called It's Your Move with Edgar Kennedy, which is a remake, at least partially, of Hats Off, where Edgar and his brother-in-law carry a washing machine up. It's a different flight of steps, but it's the same premise.
See ya. Yeah.
And I always wondered, did he borrow the reference print from the Roach lot to take a look at that before he did the remake and then not return it? What happened to that print? There should be,
that's
because
possible,
they usually made around 300 prints of everything, at least for domestic, at least for USA. I don't know what they did for foreign. Yeah. But for the USA print, there were about 300 prints, most of which were ultimately intentionally destroyed for their silver content, and then because they weren't needed anymore. But usually the studio kept at least a couple of prints and the negatives. So Don't know
It's
what
just
happened.
frustrating, isn't it? I mean, to all intents and purposes, looking at the stills, it is, it is very, very close to the music box, isn't it? Like for like.
Yeah, and the opening sequences too, which are not yet on the steps, but they're with Jimmy Finlayson.
Yeah.
That looks to be very fun. We do have, fortunately, I don't have it on physical paper, but somebody somewhere had and sent me a scan of the cutting continuity.
Oh, okay.
Now, a cutting continuity is not a script. A script is before you make the picture. A cutting continuity is after. And MGM, I don't know if other studios did this. I've only ever seen them for MGM movies. I think MGM made these in lieu of sending a physical print of the film to the Library of Congress for copyright purposes.
Right.
I think rather than sending them a print, they said, well, here's a written document of everything in the movie.
Yeah.
And usually, if we have the film, those are of minor interest. It's nice to see how they transcribe the dialogue to see if it fits with the way we hear it. And sometimes they have everything in feet and frames, so you know exactly how long every shot is. Well, in the case of a film like Hats Off, where we don't have the movie, the cutting continuity becomes very important because it tells us everything in every shot. And I think the cutting continuity for Hats Off actually does have feet and frames. So you could take that and with the stills do an approximation remake, having every shot be the exact length as it is in the real movie.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's good.
So
there is one on the YouTube,
somebody with too much time can go do that.
That's certainly not me.
Yeah.
No, there is a couple of recreations on YouTube. I think of people have put stills in order. I don't know if they've used the continuity or not.
Yeah.
It certainly gives an idea. Yeah, it certainly gives an idea. And it would have been, just great to see that the end finale gag with all the hats in the middle of the street, and just to see how that wound up.
We'll do a triple bill of London After Midnight, Greed, and Hats Off. It'll be a gigantic slideshow.
That's it. Absolutely. But it's. I mean, I know a lot of fans are not obsessed with Hats Off, but it's certainly a very interesting film to try and research. I mean, it is one of the most read of my blogs online. When I look at the stats, Hats Off, Rogue Song, always the top two, because people are just desperate to know about it.
I know there's a specific Facebook page about the campaign to find Hats Off.
That's right. So, that's right. Yeah, we're waiting for
Rogue Song. We're a little bit better off because we have the complete soundtrack because it was on discs. Yeah. That's online. You can go get that at the Internet Archive. It's under Vitaphone, even though it really technically wasn't Vitaphone.
Right.
So you can go get that. I think I certainly have a complete script and cutting continuity. And I don't know if I have the Xeroxes of them, but I did go to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences library years ago. A guy named Philip J. Riley wanted to do a book about the Rogue Song. And so I went there and I went through every still that had ever been taken for the Rogue Song, which still exists, all the scene stills, and then costume tests, photos of all the sets, everything. It's so all the images on 8x10 still exist, along with the soundtrack and script. And there's about 15 minutes of footage all put together. There's about 3 minutes of Laurel Hardy from the one little bit in the cave and from the trailer with the bee sequence. So
that's the bee. That's right. Yeah.
So there's something of it. It's not entirely lost, but Laurel Hardy had about 12 minutes of footage in that. Yeah.
And some people think it saved the film, and some critics think it killed the film. It's interesting to read up on the Rogue Song. Yeah. Really, really interesting.
Yeah, well, certainly Irving Thalberg wanted it to be because he called Roach in and said, and you can read that story in my book, but Roach told me that long story about Thalberg coming up with his own ideas for Laurel and Hardy. And but one thing I did find about Rogue Song for the new edition of the book was, there's always been a controversy about who directed Laurel and Hardy in that. Was it Lionel Barrymore? Because John McCabe told me, and he reiterated it to me in a letter, that Lionel Barrymore one day was directing Laurel and Hardy and he fell asleep. And so Laurel Hardy, being gentleman, did not call attention to it or anything. He was probably on medication because he had terrible arthritis, and of course later on he was in a wheelchair. But anyway, so there's that, which says, okay, Lionel Barrymore did it. Then I think some people said, oh, Hal Roach came over and directed it. Oh, well, okay. Some people say Stan Laurel must have directed it. Well, I found a still of Laurel and Hardy with Jimmy Parrott. Jimmy Parrott there on the set with them. And I went, well, of course. He was directing their shorts at the time. Why wouldn't he come over and direct them in that? And I couldn't figure out who the guy was with them. And I went through all the sources I had on credits, and I looked for pictures of everybody who might be the logical candidate. Finally, in a book called The Dawn of Technicolor, they had a section on the Rogue Song which had one extra credit which I hadn't found. It was a guy named Arthur Rose, who was the assistant director for the other footage. And I went, that's got to be the guy, because Jimmy Parrott is the assistant director to Barrymore for Laurel and Hardy. Arthur Rose would be the assistant director to Barrymore for the other footage. So it's Laurel and Hardy, and this guy looks like an Arthur Rose. Probably Rosenblum, but he just does, you know?
Right.
And so I said, that's got to be who that is. So it's got to be Jimmy Parrott, Stan, Arthur Rose, and Babe. So I don't know absolutely for certain sure. So I said my best guess is that it's Arthur Rose. But the fact is Jimmy Parrott's there. So... you know,
and also, he looks like he's in his kind of the clothes that he's in. He looks like he's working.
Well, why would he be there? It's a different studio.
Yeah,
you know? That's not the Roach lot. That's a mile and a half up the road on Washington Boulevard.
Yeah.
So you know, that's a different lot. So if he's there, he's there. And believe me, if you're there at MGM, you're not there just to have lunch with them. You're there for official reasons. You know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Lois Laurel always said that. She said, you know, when I was at Roach's, I could just walk on the lot and be anywhere I wanted to be, but at Fox and MGM, you know, you had to have a badge. They told you exactly where to go. You were only going to go there, and you know, it was very regimented. So that gives that, knowing that about the big studios, that gives credibility to the idea that it was Jimmy Parrott who directed their scenes in Rogue Song. So you know, I mean, it's like Indiana Jones. You know, you have these little clues that you ferret out in these old papers from 90 to 100 years ago. You know, and you're just trying to piece the little puzzle pieces together, and sometimes they fit. You know, sometimes you get lucky.
And like you're saying, that little, just a comment from Lois about what the studio, you think, of course, it makes sense.
Right.
It's fascinating. Brilliant. Right, Randy, thank you so much for this. I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you two more questions. So the first question I'm just going to ask you here is just about, do you have any projects that you're working on currently that you want to plug, anything you're into at the moment?
Well, anybody who hasn't yet gotten the definitive restorations Blu-ray or a DVD, please do so, because even if you have copies of those films, I guarantee you will be astonished at how they look and sound. And I can say that because I had nothing to do with the restorations of the films. I worked for a solid year on all of the bonus material. There's almost 9 hours of it. Dick Band supplied the stills, the scene stills from the movies, but I supplied the other photographs, including Babe's Vim-era scrapbook and a lot of other things from his personal collection. And I organized the photo galleries, and I provided the audio and filmed interviews and the Marvin Hatley music tracks, which are the only music tracks from the 30s that are known to survive, and I did 19 commentaries. People don't know where to find those. Those are under extras in case you're looking for those.
Yes.
So that's it. I'm very honored and gratified to be part of that project and to get some of my unique materials preserved in the digital domain that way. So there's that. And then Ross Owen, our friend from Scotland, is working on a wonderful multi-part documentary called On the Trail of Stan and Ollie. And I've been interviewed for that, and looking forward to that being completed. And I am working on a book about Babes in Toyland in its many incarnations, from a 1903 Broadway production by Victor Herbert to whatever the most recent one is, but focusing primarily, of course, on the 1934 Laurel and Hardy film, which is a dramatic story all by itself, the production of that film. So that's the current project. And also, basically, the rescue of that film from near extinction, thanks to a New York television station, WPIX, which, starting in the early 50s and continuing just to this last November, has shown it on Thanksgiving Day, every day for all those years. And they basically have kept that film alive in the culture. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Fantastic. So a busy man. I love it. So have you got a...
Also, every Sunday, I'm on the radio and on the internet. You can catch me in England. My Forward into the Past show is 10 o'clock on Sunday night, but it's a nice way to cap off the weekend. And I play vintage records from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and old-time radio shows like Jack Benny and that sort of thing, too. I know in England they may not be all that familiar, but they're worth a listen. And that's www.kspc.org, as in K-space. So kspc.org. Sunday nights.
And what? So is that 30s and 40s music? Did you say, Randy?
Basically from about the 1920s, 30s, and up to the end of the World War. So
fabulous.
I also do a comedy show before that called the Sunset Review, which would be on 9 o'clock UK time. And right. I do lots of character voices for that. I do about 60 different character voices.
Yeah, well, I can find that easy to believe, given the voices you've given us already.
I do Oliver Phelps. Oliver is the sort of old town sage.
And I do Percival Heavens, who's sort of the town gossip.
He's little Billy Frida, he's kind of a mischievous little kid.
So I do lots of voices.
Fantastic. Oh, that's brilliant. I wasn't expecting that. That's good. And I did want to say congratulations on the Blu-ray, the definitive restorations, because they are stunning. They are really stunning. And I wrote a blog which people can find on the blog website, and it was also reprinted in a recent edition of the Laurel Hardy magazine as well, because it is just stunning, absolutely stunning restoration. So well done on that, and thank you for contributing all of the stuff that you put into it yourself.
That's
Richard.
Jeff Joseph and Scott McQueen at UCLA, and Thad Komorowski doing the digital cleanup, and Richard Band for reclaiming the 35 millimeter material in the first place, because Hallmark Cards almost threw it away. So thank goodness for Richard at the 11th hour getting that to UCLA and preserved. So a lot of hands were, and Kit Parker, who bankrolled the whole thing, Kit Parker Films. So a lot of people contributed to that set, but I was happy to be part of the team working on it.
It is wonderful. It is absolutely wonderful, and I do recommend it to anybody. I'm obviously in the UK, and it plays absolutely fine on my machines. No problem whatsoever. Good. Shipping was not a problem, even in this day and age.
Yeah. You have to buy it from a US retailer, but they will ship worldwide.
Although I think it is on Amazon UK now. I'm pretty certain it's on UK.
Yes, and I think on one of them they say that it's American Region 1 or Blu-ray Region A, but no, they are both playable worldwide. So anybody who thought they'd have to get a special player, you don't have to.
No.
They work just fine on whatever you have in the UK. I made sure of that. I wanted to make sure our friends in England could see this, because I said that's your major market. You're going to sell more copies in the UK than you will in the States. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for that, Randy. Excellent job. And I'll put another link in the show notes to buy the restorations DVD and Blu-rays. It's also on the blog website as well, so people can find that very, very easily. Which brings us to, sadly, our final question.
Okay.
But it's always one that I look forward to, and it is the Atoll question. So, Randy, you are about to be marooned on a deserted atoll.
Does it have uranium on
it? You were allowed to take with you one of each of the following Laurel and Hardy related items. You can have a silent short, a talkie short, a feature film, and a Laurel and Hardy book. Not your own.
Not my own.
Not your. I'm afraid not.
No.
Not your own.
But I have
yours.
I have so much personal history invested in that one. Not my own. No, not. Pardon my egotism, but that one is kind of special to me.
It's special to us all. I think nearly everybody has chosen your book to keep on their islands.
Oh, goodness.
But I can't. Yes, so you can mull that over as you give me the rest of your answers.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, the three films, to actually make something concise for once, the silent would be You're Darn Tootin', the talkie short would be Helpmates, which is my favorite Laurel and Hardy of all, and the feature would be Blockheads. All for the same reason, which is that, yes, they're very funny. They have great gags. They move well, but above and beyond the main plot line of the film, they are really about the Laurel and Hardy relationship. And if you needed to show people here's what's distinctive about Laurel and Hardy as opposed to other comedy teams. Show them those 3 films. Now, I was always a little upset that William K. Everson, I think it was, who said that Your Darn Tootin' was episodic. Well, it really isn't, because if you think about it, at the beginning of the film, Laurel and Hardy have a job, a means of making a living, a place to live, and over the course of the film, they gradually lose all these things. They first they lose their job at the bandstand, then they come home to the boarding house, and little Sturgeon spills the beans that they lost their job, so the landlady kicks them out, so they've lost the job and the home. Now they're buskers, as you say in England, on the street with the clarinet and the French horn, and through an argument, they lose both of those. So they've lost that means, and they almost lose their trousers, and of course they almost lose their friendship because of the stomach and punching and the shin kicking. Yes. But at the very end of the film, what happens? They go off together in that one big oversized pair of trousers, tipping their hats. So it's like that's what survives. It's the one thing that will not be torn apart is that friendship. Same thing with helpmates. Yeah. What more could you do to someone under the guise of helping them than burn down their house?
Well, I guess there's nothing else I can do.
No, I guess not. And
That's
yet,
a great line.
And yet, the key moment is Stan's crying because he's so upset over it. Notice that when it's just Stan by himself, Ollie's not around. Stan cleans all those dishes. Yeah, no problem. Stan, when Ollie is going off to meet the wife in his costume, Stan cleans up that house. It's already cleaned. No problem. But as soon as they're in the same room, chaos. So, that's it. And also the fact that Stan gets there, Ollie hangs up the phone and boom, there's Stan at the door. Something in Stan by himself is almost superhuman.
Yes.
It's only Ollie who's the smarter of the two, who's wrecking things for the both of them, obviously.
That's right.
But for me, the key moment is, Stan is crying about having, I was trying to make a nice fire to make it comfortable for you.
What happened?
Well, I was all ready to leave, and I thought I'd build a nice fire to make it comfortable for you. The house burned down, and I couldn't help it. I did all I could. I did all the best I could.
And Ollie just waves it away with his fingers, as if to say, not to worry, this is to be expected.
That's right.
Not only do I forgive you, I'll see you around soon next time,
That's it.
And it's like, there's Laurel and Hardy. That's, that essential friendship is absolutely unbreakable. And again, as I mentioned earlier with Blockheads, 20 years of separation after the World War. And when they finally do meet, it's, I'm never letting you out of my sight again.
Ollie!
Don't get up now. Sit right there.
How'd you know I was here?
I saw your picture in the paper.
Did you?
Yeah.
How'd I look?
Well, you haven't changed a bit.
Neither of you, too. If I hadn't have seen you, I never would have known you. Gee, I'm glad to see you.
I'm glad to see you, too.
Have you missed me all this time?
I certainly have.
I missed you, too.
I want you to remember, from now on, my home is your home.
Thank you, Ollie.
You're welcome, Stan. And I'm never going to let you out of my sight again.
Thank you, Ollie.
You're welcome, Stan.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 films that, for me, emphasize what is distinctive about Laurel and Hardy, and that is the unbreakable friendship of these 2 highly, very, very different people, but they're kindred spirits.
Yeah.
I mean, even in real life, what could be more unusual than a man from Georgia in America and a man from Ulverston, England?
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Finding such empathy as actors and as people, and of course, the nice thing about the real Laurel and Hardy story, despite what you might get from the Stan and Ollie movie, is that the friendship actually got stronger and stronger and stronger over the years. I mean, I knew Lucille Hardy for 15 years, and, she said, well, at first it was this pleasant business association, and they never really saw each other outside of making the pictures, and they wouldn't see each other for a month or two, and that probably was a good thing because, each person had his own territory. They weren't living in each other's pocket. But once they had to do the tours, then, Stan and Babe and Ida and Lucille are together all the time. And Lucille said, and that's when they really actually connected more with each other on a personal level. They were with each other all the time. And, their career wasn't going all that well, but they were doing everything they could to, get things. And they certainly still had a measure of fame in Europe, even if in Hollywood all they wanted to make were film noir movies and westerns now. They didn't want to make comedies. They still were a big draw overseas. So, they found that to their mutual great joy and relief. And, so they were having shared emotional experiences as people later on. And so anyway, the friendship grew stronger and stronger over the years. That's a nice thing, because most comedy teams start off as fast friends and drift apart as the years go by, but not so with Laurel and Hardy.
Like music bands as well, I guess. They all start off and then they all have their ego trips and disappear. Yeah, and I guess also, I was thinking about it the other day. The nice thing, thinking about the later tours of the UK and of Europe. Ultimately, they just say their careers weren't going that well. All they had left was themselves, was each other again. Yeah. Just like in the films, exactly in the films. Yeah. Well, all they have was each other, and I think, and that, in fact, that is a line in the Stan and Ollie movie, isn't it?
When you watch our movies, nobody else in the stories knows us. We don't know anybody either. It was just the two of us. All we had was each other. It was just the way we wanted it. I love him, Ida.
There were points of that film which I think were very good. There
are points. I do wish they hadn't done the thing with throwing the roll.
Yeah.
And Stan had no problems whatsoever with Babe making Zenobia, because Stan had been fired from the studio at the point when Zenobia was being made, and so he knew that Babe still had to make a living. And so when Zenobia was being released, Stan sent a congratulatory telegram to Babe and said, wishing you loads of success. So there were some points made that really didn't have to be made, because there was enough drama in real life going on in Laurel and Hardy's life that you could have made a picture out of what really existed rather than having to invent these things. But but there are a lot of good things in Stan and Ollie, and it brought Laurel and Hardy back into the limelight for a while, and had made people aware of them again. So 10 points for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it has a lot of heart and soul to it. It was done with love, I think, and affection for the boys, which is we can't ask for more than that, really. Yeah. A bit of a missed opportunity, I think, to celebrate the golden years, but then that wasn't the focus of the movie, right. and I get that. So but wonderful. Randy, I'm going to let you go, because I've had a wonderful time. I could listen to you all night, and
well, I think you have actually.
Would you come back on again for some future episodes?
Oh,
I know
absolutely.
You mentioned
anytime.
Anytime, right?
Tomorrow at about 3 a.m, I think. My time.
Yeah, that's right. No problem. I'm writing it down. Anytime.
Okay.
Andy Skretvedt said. Okay. No, that's wonderful. And I will definitely be back in touch. We'll have you back on. Thank you so much for being with us today. This has been a very highly anticipated episode. Lots of people saying, when are you going to get Randy on? When are you Randy Skretvedt coming on?
And now they'll say, don't ever have him on again.
No chance. Yeah. Thank you ever so much, Randy. We really appreciate it. Take care. Stay safe. And
to all of your listeners and viewers, yes, stay safe, stay well. Let's all have a wondrous 2021. Let's make our own 20s roar in a good way.
Here. Yeah. Here. Well said, that man. Thank you, Randy. Thank you ever so much.
You're welcome.
So that's almost all for episode 10, although I was planning to review, or at least discuss, the brand new US Blu-ray release of Laurel Hardy, the restored solo films. I received my copy just a couple of days ago, actually, and so I haven't been able to give it a full inspection just yet, although what I have seen has been fantastic. So what I did do, with the aim of including it in this episode, as it's so current, was I reached out to our good friend Rob Stone, who you'll remember was our very first guest back in episode 1, when we chatted about the boys' solo film careers and also The Lucky Dog. And Rob agreed to get online with me straight away, and we had a great discussion about the Blu-rays. So great, in fact, that I ended up with so much content, I'm going to package it up and release it as a bonus blogcast episode, which will probably be released in about a week or so's time. So make sure you don't miss that bonus episode and any episode by clicking on the subscribe button on your podcast provider. Also, if you're enjoying these podcasts, it would please me greatly if you would leave me a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Podbay or wherever you're able to leave one. And one last little bit of news that I'm really excited about is the launch of the Laurel and Hardy blog merchandise. I've been working with a superb designer recently, and we have not only upgraded our Laurel and Hardy blog logo, but we're also releasing a number of T-shirts, mugs, bags, all sorts of things, and we plan to add many more fun designs as we go along as well. If you'd like to show your support for the show, then please do click on the links on the show notes or on the Laurel and Hardy blog website, and you could be having your own cup of tea and your own Laurel and Hardy blog mug, or you could wear your T-shirt with pride. And don't forget, for more Laurel and Hardy chat, of course, or discussion, you can become a member of our Bloghead community simply by joining the Blogheads Facebook group. It's completely free to join. Oh, and I will be posting some video clips from these last 2 episodes where Randy is showing us the pieces from his collection linked to Call of the Cuckoo's Hats Off and I think Second 100 Years as well, so don't miss that. And all that remains now is for me to thank Randy for being such a wonderful guest. Thank you to the Bohunks Orchestra, of course, for the fabulous music. And most importantly, thank you for being here with me again. I mean, it really wouldn't be a show without you. And until next time, it's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
And a very goodbye from me. Goodbye.